Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and thank you for joining us today on the Islam channel, where we are delighted and honored to have with us Imam Zaid Shakir, who's here all the way from the United States, DC, to discuss with us a number of issues that inshallah we can benefit from and learn from, and we can get to know his personality a little bit better and gain insight from this Imam, mashallah, who has so much knowledge, inshallah, and will be with us for a little while. So tune in for different programs that we will discuss towards the end of the show. Imam Zaid, Jazakallah khair, thank you very much for being with us today.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like if we could start off with you talking about your conversion or reversion, whichever you prefer, however you prefer to address it. And tell us a little
conversion.
bit. Conversion.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit then, if that's what you prefer, about why that terminology is preferred. And go into the history of a little bit of your pre-Islam state, and more particularly how you came to Islam.
I prefer conversion because it's a conscious act. Reversion has an element of spontaneity involved, or unconscious decision. You revert back to something. Also, it's certainly true that every newborn is born in a natural state of submission. Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra. But one is not conscious of that state. One is only conscious of the state of a lack of Islam, for lack of a better term, that one was in. So one consciously goes to Islam and not back to a state one was totally unaware of. So that's why I prefer a conversion. So in any case, my conversion was the result of a search. I was in 12th grade in high school, my final year in high school. I began to think deeply about the problems in the society that I was growing up in. And that was a society that was characterized by a lot of social problems. I was in a poor neighborhood, public housing projects. My father wasn't in the picture, 7 children. But we had a good childhood, and my mother took care of us. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she didn't have a drug habit. So she spent the money she had on us, keeping us well fed and clothed and doing her best. But around myself and around my family, immediate family, there were a lot of problems. Drugs, alcoholism, domestic violence. So as I became more conscious, I asked myself, how can one begin to address these issues? So the first thing I thought was through the religion. So we were Baptist, but I didn't know anything about the Baptist creed. I didn't know anything about what distinguished a Baptist from a Protestant, or Catholic rather, a Methodist from an Episcopalian, a Presbyterian from a Lutheran. I didn't know any of those details. So I began to study Christianity, its history, its formative stages. And as I studied it, I became very disenchanted. And my experience led me to believe that it was a man-made religion, that it was fabricated. And I won't go into the details associated with that. In any case, that sort of led me to reject religion altogether, as that was the religion I was familiar with. So when I rejected that, I rejected all religion and went through a phase of atheism in which I didn't believe in God at all. And that opened the door for my involvement with the communist doctrine and the Communist Party. And I came to believe that the solution was to be found in the communist revolution, that we will have a class-based struggle, and those who were exploited will end up on top, and the exploiters will be vanquished. So the proletariat will vanquish the bourgeoisie, and we'd have a classless society, and we'd all live happily ever after, and each would be given according to their need, and the rhetoric of that movement. In any case, so I was proceeding, and I was studying the various literature, Communist Manifesto, and other writings, until I came across a book, actually a pamphlet, that was arguing for the existence of God, based on a causation argument that if you go back to the very beginning, how did something appear from nothing without a creator? And I thought about it, and then the author went on to argue that if we can't consciously do that, if we took a vacuum and the best minds on earth without introducing something that already exists into that vacuum, can we make something appear from nothing with a plan devised by the best minds on earth? If you can't do that, how could it happen spontaneously in the vast vacuum of space? And so I concluded, as the author was arguing, that there had to be a creator who created something from nothing. Also that his second stage was that if that thing did spontaneously appear, so poof, here we have it, how did it take on the properties of life? And how did it begin to evolve, to multiply, to reproduce itself without a life giver to bestow onto it the properties of life? So I concluded there had to be a life giver. And then his final argument was that if we assume the impossibility of this thing appearing on its own, and if we assume that it can take on the properties of life and begin to multiply and expand in an orderly fashion, then how could it evolve with no planner, no arranger, no organizer into all of the intricacy, the vastness, the interconnected systems that we see throughout this universe? So sort of the intelligent design argument. So I was convinced that there had to be a creator, there had to be a life giver, there had to be a designer, an evolver, a cherisher. And I would later learn that these were all from the names and attributes of God. So in any case, or among the names and attributes of God. So I concluded there has to be a God. But the next step in terms of my personal search was, who is God and what does God want from human beings, and how do we worship God in a sure fashion? So I began to find an answer to that question, and that led me to study Buddhism, and it led me to study again Christianity, which I again rejected a second time. It led me to transcendental meditation that I was involved in for 2 years approximately. So I would meditate, and that was great. But as I studied Eastern religions and Eastern mysticism, the benefits for myself were tremendous, but my original quest was finding insight into dealing with the problems in society. And I found that those religions had very little to offer from that point of view. So at that point, when I was beginning to get disenchanted with the Eastern religions and Eastern mysticism, not personally because I was feeling very good, I was getting enlightened, I thought I was on the verge of levitating, actually being able to float in the air. But it offered nothing, no program for society at large. So right at that point, a friend of mine gave me a book on Islam, and that book was Islam in Focus, which is pretty common in Dawah circles, Islamic propagation circles. So when I read that book, I concluded, based on the knowledge, the information it conveyed, that Islam is the true religion. And shortly thereafter, I went to a local Islamic center and became Muslim. So in a nutshell, that's how I converted to Islam.
So from baptism to atheism to communism to back to Christianity, Buddhism, and so on and so forth. Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with the blessing of Islam.
Indeed.
Couple of questions. What was the name of the book that you read?
Islam in Focus.
Before that, yeah.
I don't know. It was one of those Christian cartoon books. You might have seen them. They're rectangular in shape. Mm-hmm. So they weren't arguing for Christianity per se. They were just arguing for the existence of God. I forget the name of that. I even forget the circumstances that I got it. It was under the windshield wiper of my car. I forget exactly, but I remember the arguments that the author was putting forward.
In the meantime, were there any friends of yours? You said a friend of yours gave you the book, Islam in Focus. Did they have any influence in your life? Were they prominent figures in terms of, they're Muslim, look at what they're doing? Or was it primarily just this book that made them?
Not really, they knew that I was searching. And so I guess they figured they would help me in my search. Mm-hmm. And they did.
And finally, how long ago was this?
This was in the actual acceptance of Islam was in 1977. Yeah.
MashaAllah. Very good. Well, of course, Islam is blessed to have you as our brother. Alhamdulillah.
I'm blessed to have Islam.
Alhamdulillah, of course. Then afterwards, you went through a series of, I guess, knowledge, searching for knowledge and information in order to reach, obviously, the level that you are in today. I would assume that primarily the big bulk of that came from your trip to the Middle East to study there. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Right. Well, as you say, becoming Muslim, one wants to know how to do this right. How do I practice Islam? How do I worship Islam? Allah, what are the proper and appropriate beliefs that a Muslim should endorse and adhere to? So I began gradually. At first, I didn't have any literature, even just the Islam in Focus book. But I was able to through a trip to New York to the Islamic Center at that time on Riverside Avenue, to buy my first collection of Islamic books. I bought the Sahih Muslim translation. I read it from cover to cover with the notes. I bought all of these booklets that were coming out of Pakistan at the time. I read all of those, and I really was reading voraciously. But gradually, as time went on, I came to realize that really, like everything, if you really want to know something, you have to go to the source. And for me, the source was the Muslim world. So I was blessed with the opportunity to go to the Muslim world on two occasions. First to Egypt in 1986-87, where I was able to spend a year in Egypt, and I began studying Arabic language. Actually, I began before that in college at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. But I was able to go to Egypt and to study more. And after returning from Egypt, I became really involved in a lot of propagation work, primarily under the auspices of Masjid al-Islam in New Haven, Connecticut. So I eventually became the imam of that masjid. But doing that work for 6 or 7 years, I realized my shortcomings, that I needed further study. So I made a decision to go to Syria, which I did in 1994, and I spent 6 years there. And 1 year in Morocco after that, studying Islam. And I was able to get a good exposure to the basic Islamic sciences and to study and sit in the presence of some really pious and educated individuals who helped me tremendously in terms of learning Islam and in terms of understanding the holistic picture that Islam is not an abstraction of various sciences, but all of these sciences are part of an integrated whole. And that integrated whole has to be understood in order that those sciences become part of a greater system. And that system itself is a system that's designed to enhance life on this planet and to enhance the individual lives of human beings and to provide a path to salvation. And I think once the individual sciences are abstracted, that's when we tend to get into trouble.
What are the specific subject matters that you studied while in Syria?
So I was able to go to the Islamic Propagation College, Kulliyat al-Da'wat al-Islamiyya in Damascus, that's located at Abi Noor Institute in Rukn al-Din. So there you got an introduction to virtually all of the sciences at a basic level. And I was also blessed with an opportunity to study with some individual teachers, most prominently Sheikh Mustafa Turkmani in part of Damascus called Zahra Qadima, which is an extension of Midan, a very religious part of the city. And we studied, we read books in grammar, books in Islamic jurisprudence, books in Quranic exegesis. We read the tafsir of half of the Quran from Surah Fatiha to Surah Ra'd. So a little under half, page by page, word by word. And several others, Usul al-Hadith, the Muqaddimah of Ibn Salah, and Tasawwuf, a large portion of the the commentary on the Hikam, the aphorisms of Ibn Ata'illah Siskandari, called iqad al-himam, so awakening lofty spiritual aspirations. So we read a good part of that. So we were blessed in that regard.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of youth all around the world almost today are always talking about going to particularly Middle Eastern countries, primarily Syria, and studying. Do you recommend it? Do you recommend to them that they wait until a certain point in their life, or just go when you can? What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think that young people should really think about what they want to do, because the time I was in Syria, especially the latter years, a lot of people were coming through there, and they really weren't focused and really didn't know what they wanted to do. We would work assiduously to get individuals enrolled in various schools. They would stay there 3 or 4 weeks, drop out. I heard the teachers are better at this school and run off to that school. I heard private lessons are better and arrange private lessons, and they stick to that for a month or two. And then, well, I heard it's better in Egypt and run off to Egypt. Well, Morocco's better. You can go to the high Atlas Mountains and you don't have the fitna of the big city with the cars and the pollution and the pretty girls to distract you and run off over there. So you had a lot of that. So I think the first thing, a person should really think about what they want in terms of the study of Islam. Secondly, I think it's very important to look at what Allah has facilitated for one in one's life. A lot of people, I think, Allah had facilitated another path. Maybe that path was a Western university education. Maybe that path was working and raising a family. And really, I think a lot of people were going against what Allah had facilitated for them. And as a result, they didn't have much success in their endeavor. So I think it's very important to focus and concentrate and think through what one wants from an Islamic education. And secondly, to see if Allah Ta'ala is actually facilitating that for one. And if not, I think the lack of foresight and thought and the lack of divine facilitation combined with the basic impetuousness of youth will really lead a lot of people on misadventures, and they're wasting time, money, and possibly alienating a lot of individuals who will be inclined to help those coming after them, to say these people aren't serious.
After your Islamic studies abroad, you came back to the States and eventually were involved with the Zaytuna institution. What are your contributions within that facility?
At Zaytuna Institute, and you termed it very well, eventually became involved, because it wasn't immediately after my return to the States. It was about a year and a half to 2 years later. So I returned actually to Masjid al-Islam in Connecticut, and for a number of reasons I ended up at Zaytuna in California, working with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. So our goal there is to just advance the preservation and teaching of traditional Islamic knowledge. So that's knowledge that emanates from established Islamic schools of thought, be that in juridical matters, be that in creedal matters, be that in methodological approaches. So the vast array of the traditional historical Islamic intellectual heritage, to preserve that work, to teach that, and to use that as a basis to address contemporary issues. So my work there has been in teaching, doing research, writing, and also in working to establish a full-time Islamic seminary, so that the young people won't have to necessarily go overseas to study, and they can do advanced Islamic studies in an environment that's consistent with the environment they'll subsequently be working in as callers to the faith, as teachers, as sermoneers, whatever area. So we're working very hard towards that goal. And we've been blessed to complete 1 year of a pilot program where we actually had a group of students who went through the first year curriculum. This year, that pilot will extend a second year, and we hope and pray that next year we'll be able to open the doors for an entire class to start the process in earnest, inshallah.
Inshallah. Hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants you success in all those endeavors and big projects, big plans, especially for the U.S. community.
I think it has global implications,
yes,
though.
Of course, but just at home.
Our success is your success, and vice versa.
Alhamdulillah. Finally, we have so many different issues that we're addressing as a Muslim community globally, really internationally. We have the problem, in the past we used to say that the Muslims in the West are facing a lot of fitna, a lot of diversions, a lot of different issues, but now it's not just the West, it's everywhere. You go to the East, you see the same thing. And so I'd like your perspectives on the condition of the Muslims today, on the status that we're in, and maybe any solutions, any advice you have to the Ummah in general.
Well, I think you've termed it very accurately. Everywhere Muslims and people in general are faced with tremendous challenges, trials, tribulations in some instances. And I think Muslims here in the West are no exceptions, nor Muslims in the East to that. I think, first of all, it's very important for us to realize the nature of this world. Imam Ali, radiallahu anhu, Allah be pleased with him, he said, Man arafa ad-dunya hanat alayhi al-musibat. The one who understands the nature of this world, calamities become easy for him or her to deal with. So we should understand the nature of this world is that it's the abode of trial and tribulations. That's the nature of this world. And that being the case, as these trials come, I think if we understand that this is not an anomalous situation, this isn't something we can run away from, or this isn't something that hasn't been promised to us by Allah in the Quran, or nor by His Messenger, and peace and blessings of God be upon him. So I think it's very important for us to understand that, and this helps us to avoid attempts to find desperate solutions, that we can maintain our calm and understand this is what we've been promised. This is the nature of the world. Why get upset? Why panic? That's the first thing. Secondly, to understand that despite the tremendous trials, tribulations, and challenges we're faced with, that they're not unprecedented. And in fact, they're a lot less than what was dealt with by earlier Muslims. I mean, what are we encountering here in the West? For example, even in the aftermath of 7/7 or the aftermath of 9/11, what are we encountering compared to the Muslims who were in Spain at the time of the Inquisition? What are we encountering compared with the Muslims who faced the Mongol hordes as they swept across Central Asia? Nothing, absolutely nothing. So I think it's important to understand that these trials and tribulations aren't unprecedented, and they're far lighter, far less than that which was endured or faced by those who preceded us. And again, that helps us to keep everything in proportion. I think finally it's very important for us to understand how important patience is. And when we say patience, we don't mean just bearing abuses or injustices, but in a Shari sense, in a legal Islamic sense. Basically, patience involves three things, as the scholars say. Patience in dealing with the hardship that comes in implementing the orders that Allah has imposed on us, implementing the commandments. So, sabru ala ta'ah. And we have to, there are going to be difficulties that we encounter being Muslims who are trying to obey Allah. So we've been ordered to pray 5 times a day. Here in the West, that can be challenging in some circumstances. A person works. So maybe I can't take this particular job because it won't allow me to pray. So I have to take another job. And the other job pays $20,000 less a year. It pays 10,000 pounds less a year. But that loss is part of the difficulty that I endure being a believer in this world. Then there's patience, sabr ala nawahi, patience in dealing with the hardship from avoiding those things that are prohibited. So I can't sell alcohol in my store. And if I do so, I've been threatened with being cursed by Allah. So, because alcohol is prohibited, I can't drink it. I can't use drugs. I can't fornicate. I can't have a girlfriend. So as a result, I'm going to lose the love of my life. But that loss again, I patiently persevere and endure. And I understand that Allah will give me something better. And then as-sabr ala al-musibat, patience in dealing with the calamities that come. So those calamities might be natural disasters such as the tsunami. Those calamities might be catastrophic political defeats. Those calamities can involve any number of things, but I have to patiently persevere in dealing with those things and work through Islamic means to overcome the hardships and the oppression and difficulties that those things might impose on me. And again, stay within the bounds set by Allah Ta'ala. تِلْكَ حُدُودُ اللَّهِ فَلَا تَقْرَبُوهَا. So these are the boundaries, the limits set by Allah. Don't come close to violating them. So I think it's very important for us to try to contextualize what we're up against. And if we're able to properly contextualize everything, we can deal with them in an Islamically acceptable fashion. And I think we can avoid a lot of the excesses and extremes that qualify some of our reactions to the situation that we find ourselves in. And we can be better ambassadors for Islam.
You say what we're up against. As a Muslim female who grew up in the West, I know that we are up against a lot. Do you think Muslims in the West are facing more of these trials and challenges than in the East?
I don't think so. I think they're all different. And from Allah Ta'ala's wisdom, Allah Ta'ala is al-Latif. So He's gentle and He understands the subtleties that are involved in our lives. So there are very subtle trials that He can give us here in the West that would only be trials for us in the West. There are trials He can give to you as an individual that if you were to tell another person, I'm really bothered by this, they would laugh and say, why? But because of your experience and your life and your situation, your circumstance, this thing that someone else would laugh at, for you is a tremendously weighty trial. And that's from Al-Latif. So I think the trials we have are our trials. And the trials Muslims have in other parts of the world are their trials. The trials that the sisters have are the sisters' trials. And the trials that the brothers have are the brothers' trials. And each one is unique. And because it's unique, it's something that requires a unique solution that's informed by Islam. So I think what's important is not so much comparing or even contemporarily Muslims in other places and other circumstances or historically, but understanding we have our trials, we have Islam. Islam provides us a means to deal with those trials. So what's important for us is to use those Islamic means as those who preceded us have done in many instances. And we'll be okay.
Inshallah, with all of these unique issues that we face on a daily basis, or even monthly, yearly, these big things that we consider so important and others might not. We have friends or family members or confidants who might say to us, well, here's what I recommend you do. Now, if you take that issue and make it very general, for the general picture and the general youth that we have, I'm going to start a sentence and I'd like for you to finish it. I would recommend that you, as Muslims facing trials in every way or way, do this.
I would recommend that you step back and ask yourself, what would the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, do in this situation?
What if it's a person that is not well versed in the history or seerah of the Prophet or Islam?
I would recommend that you step back and ask yourself, what would a decent, self-respecting, law-abiding individual do in this situation?
What about the people who say, I can't deal with this pressure here in the West, I have to make hijrah. This is my solution.
I would recommend that you sell your house, sell your car, take your money and make hijrah.
And what is your opinion on hijrah in general in terms of it being an obligation in the deen?
Hijrah is an obligation under some circumstances, but I do not personally feel hijrah is an obligation here in the West. And I think a lot of the classical discussions concerning hijrah are highly nuanced. In other words, if you say, well, we have to make hijrah from Dar al-Harb to Dar al-Islam. Where is Dar al-Harb and where is Dar al-Islam nowadays? So if you say, well, Dar al-Harb is a land that's warring against Muslims, that means we can't go to Saudi Arabia because they warred against Muslims in the 1991 Gulf War, when they bombed the Muslim Iraqis, facilitated the destruction of that country. So that rules out going to the land of the two most sacred mosques in Islam as the place of hijrah. So you say, what is Dar al-Islam? Dar al-Islam is the land that defends Muslims and allows the free practice of Islam. So you could say in some circumstances the Americans, despite all of their other shortcomings, defended the Muslims of Kosovo and bombed Serbia until they backed off from Kosovo and therefore saved the Muslims in Kosovo. So does that make America Dar al-Islam? Or we're free in Masjid al-Islam in America. We call the adhan 5 times a day on a loudspeaker. We have congregational prayers. We collect and distribute the zakat. We engage in all of the Islamic obligations. We dress like Muslims. Sisters can wear niqab if they want. No one bothers them. So we can freely practice Islam. Is that Dar al-Islam? So these are days and times that defy simple, simplistic solutions to very complicated issues. So I would say that wherever you are, be the best Muslim you can be. And there's still tremendous opportunities here in the West. You know, they're not shooting people down in the streets. Muslims, women, sisters aren't having their hijabs yanked off as a general rule. Some emotional person might go off and do something, but as a general rule, we can still freely propagate Islam. If we put our monies together, we can make television networks, satellite networks, we can buy newspapers, we can open publishing houses, we can freely disseminate any information we want about Islam here in the West. And I think the people also have a lot of goodwill towards Muslims, despite certain elements in the population that are trying to sway others. So certainly you have these conservative right-wing elements that are trying to sway the majority of the population, but I think the majority are still open to Islam and still are interested in what we Muslims have to say about Islam and still are interested in hearing our side of the story. So I think it behooves us to take advantage of our presence here instead of people looking to either run away or do some irrational act that's going to alienate people from Islam, blowing up something or shooting somebody, which isn't going to change anything. It behooves us to take advantage of the situation Allah Ta'ala has given us, the situation to organize, the opportunity to inform people about Islam, and then He's put us here to take advantage of our presence here to let people know about Islam. And that's our jihad. You want a jihad? Undertake that jihad. And if you think it's easy, ask yourself, why aren't more people doing it? Why aren't more people? Some of the young people, they have courage. You know, they have courage. They're willing to blow themselves up. They have courage. They're willing to go somewhere to get a gun and to kill or be killed. But they don't have enough courage to knock on their neighbor's door and tell them about Islam. So go knock on your neighbor's door. Tell them you're a Muslim. Tell them what Islam is. I'm sure they're ready to hear, So I think we have to really look at what we're doing and really see, you're here in Britain, you're aware of Adam Smith, right? One of his terms, comparative advantage. What is our comparative advantage as a community here in the West vis-a-vis Muslims elsewhere? Our comparative advantage is that we are here, therefore we have an opportunity through information, and I think more importantly through our character and conduct, to let people know what Islam is. And I think you see waves of people entering into Islam, especially now, because there's a lot of uncertainty about past ways of doing things. There's a lot of openings that lead to questioning one's faith, one's historical faith. So a lot of people are looking for a new way, and I think Islam could be that way if we as Muslims do our job. And I think that involves reassessing how we're going about our business here in the West.
And you're exactly right. Alhamdulillah, one of the biggest blessings that we Muslims in the West have been able to see right before our eyes is this massive conversion of non-Muslims from a state of jahiliyyah and ignorance and lack of Islam to the state of submission, which is, of course, the biggest gift that can be bestowed upon any person. So these people who embrace this beautiful faith are faced with a lot of issues, maybe trials of their own and some problems that they may have. I'd like for you to end with some advice to the recent converts. But before that, for people who are considering Islam, then move on to the recent converts, and then general advice to not the Muslim Ummah, but particularly the youth of the Muslim Ummah today, and what we can do for moving towards a better future, inshallah.
I think people considering Islam should definitely look at Islam on its virtues. People who are recently converted, be patient and understand that there will be trials and tribulations, and paradise is the reward. And for the youth in general to just step up, stand up, and play your proper role. Understand what it is, and then assume it.
Well, these people who are embracing Islam sometimes don't find the support they need from the community. What about that aspect of it? I know part of that, largely is the Muslim community's responsibility, but how do you address the Muslim community in that regards, and how do you address the converts who are kind of find themselves stuck without a family, without...
Right. I think it's tragic because it shows a lack of foresight and vision on the part of the community. In other words, we spend great energy, time, and money trying to address the problems which are very complex and difficult in the Muslim world, and don't look at the problems right here where we are, the immediate concerns of converts, the immediate concerns of those who are looking for insight into Islam. So I think we really have to reorient generally as a community how we look at our role and how we look at how we're allocating our resources in terms of addressing a lot of the issues that you bring up. In terms of new converts that aren't finding anything, I would say lower your expectations. You know, turn to Allah. When I converted to Islam, I didn't expect anything from anyone. I was just happy Allah Ta'ala blessed me with this religion and did everything in my power to try to do something for the religion, as opposed to trying to get something from someone else. So I want to give. And I would say to any convert, make sure that you're the upper hand. Work to give something back and to give to others, and don't expect anything. Lower the expectations and you'll never be disappointed.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for joining us today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward you and make this journey easy for you and help people to benefit from you. And your channel would like to thank you for joining us today. Inshallah, we look forward to seeing you on future programs, hopefully with Imam Zaid Shakir and with other scholars. Bi'idhnillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, and thank you for joining us today on the Islam channel, where we are delighted and honored to have with us Imam Zaid Shakir, who's here all the way from the United States, DC, to discuss with us a number of issues that inshallah we can benefit from and learn from, and we can get to know his personality a little bit better and gain insight from this Imam, mashallah, who has so much knowledge, inshallah, and will be with us for a little while. So tune in for different programs that we will discuss towards the end of the show. Imam Zaid, Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Alhamdulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I'd like if we could start off with you talking about your conversion or reversion, whichever you prefer, however you prefer to address it. And tell us a little
conversion.
bit. Conversion.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit then, if that's what you prefer, about why that terminology is preferred. And go into the history of a little bit of your pre-Islam state, and more particularly how you came to Islam.
Right. I prefer conversion because it's a conscious act. Reversion has an element of spontaneity involved, or unconscious decision. You revert back to something. Also, it's certainly true that every A newborn is born in a natural state of submission. Kullu mawludin yuladu ala al-fitra. But one is not conscious of that state. One is only conscious of the state of a lack of Islam, for lack of a better term, that one was in. So one consciously, the stages, and as I studied it, I became very disenchanted. And my experience led me to believe that it was a man-made religion, that it was fabricated. And I won't go into the details associated with that. In any case, that sort of led me to reject religion altogether, as that was the religion I was familiar with. So when I rejected that, I rejected all religion and went through a phase of atheism in which I didn't believe in God at all. And that opened the door for my involvement with the communist doctrine and the Communist Party. And I came to believe that the solution was to be found in the communist revolution, that we will have a class-based struggle, and those who were exploited will end up on top, and the exploiters will be goals to Islam and not back to a state one was totally unaware of. So that's why I put for a conversion. So in any case, my conversion was the result of a search. I was in 12th grade in high school, my final year in high school. I began to think deeply about the problems in the society that I was growing up in. And that was a society that was characterized by a lot of social problems. I was in a poor neighborhood, public housing projects. My father wasn't in the picture, 7 children. But we had a good childhood, and my mother took care of us. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, she didn't have a drug habit. So she spent the money she had on us, keeping us well fed and clothed and doing her best. But around myself and around my family, immediate family, there were a lot of problems. Drugs, alcoholism, domestic violence. So as I became more conscious, I asked myself, how can one begin to address these issues? So the first thing I thought was through the religion. So we were Baptist, but I didn't know anything about the Baptist creed. I didn't know anything about what distinguished a Baptist from a Protestant, or Catholic rather, a Methodist from an Episcopalian, a Presbyterian from a Lutheran. I didn't know any of those details. So I began to study Christianity, its history, its formative